You're welcome to another video of the course IP version 6. In this section, I'm going to discuss and demonstrate OSPF version 3 LSA types and compare to OSPF version 2 in IP version 4. Among dynamic routing protocols, probably OSPF has the most changes in IP version 6, and these changes are mostly related to new LSA types in OSPF version 3. In this section, we will configure both OSPF version 2 and OSPF version 3 in a dual stack topology, which allows us to observe and understand practically how OSPF version 3 LSAs differ from those in OSPF version 2. As you may already know, LSA type 1, 2, LSA type 5, and also LSA type 7 are the most widely recognized LSA types in OSPF version 2. And I will assume that you are already familiar with these LSA types. And in this section, I'm going to only concentrate on the changes in LSA types in OSPF version 3, which are LSA type 8 or link LSA, a new LSA in OSPF version 3 in IP version 6, LSA type 9 or intra-area prefix LSA, which is also new. And also we have some changes in LSA type 1 or router LSA, which we will discuss in this lesson. To have a better and practical understanding on how OSPF LSA types in IP version 6 are different from those in OSPF version 2, I've already prepared a topology. Three routers are connected to each other serially. And in this topology, I've configured both IP version 4 and IP version 3 in the links between the routers and also loopback interfaces in router 1 and router 3. I've configured all interfaces of the router 1 with link local address FE801, for the router 2 FE802, and for the router 3 FE803. And the other IPv6 addresses are, as you can see in the topology. If I focus on OSPF configuration changes only, you see for the configuration of OSPF in IP version 4, we use router OSPF process number command. We will use the same command in IP version 6, but instead of router OSPF, we use IPv6 router OSPF and then process number. In IP version 4, we use a network command to activate the interfaces in OSPF routing process, but in IP version 6, we will go inside the interfaces and we will enable interfaces into OSPF process and in a specific area with the command IPv6 OSPF, OSPF process, and area number. I've already enabled both interfaces, loopback and Ethernet interfaces. Router ID command is the same, and for both IPv4 and IPv6 is 32 bits, and therefore I've configured the same. As you know, OSPF version 2 and OSPF version 3 are completely independent and isolated, and because of that, it's possible to configure the same router ID for both OSPF version 2 and OSPF version 3, and they have nothing to do with each other. I've also enabled passive interface for the interface loopback, not to send any OSPF update on loopback interfaces. And the same command is also will be used for both IPv4 and IPv6. The other difference for configuration of OSPF version 3 is IPv6 unicast routing. In IPv6, which you cannot configure any dynamic routing protocol before you enable IPv6 unicast routing in Cisco routers. Just to check the configuration, for example, in router 2, I'm here in the router 2 and I will check the configuration with show running config, section router OSPF. This is the configuration of router OSPF for IPv4 with network command and for IPv6 without network command. Router ID are the same, and in IPv6 OSPF is enabled in interfaces directly, for example, ETH0/0 with IPv6 OSPF1 area 0 and the same command for the other interface. And also I've enabled IPv6 OSPF network point-to-point command, IP OSPF network point-to-point to avoid OSPF neighborship in multi-access network. Actually, they are just like a point-to-point network, and there is no DR and BDR as we have in OSPF in multi-access network. And the configuration of OSPF network point-to-point is the same, but we use only IPv6 instead of IP in IP version 6. And if we check the neighborship, show IPv6 OSPF neighborship to check neighborship for OSPF version 3 and show IP OSPF neighbor to check for neighborship in IP version 4 or OSPF version 2. The configuration is already done and it is ready to investigate differences in LSA types in OSPF version 3 compared to OSPF version 2. This table shows how LSA types are different in OSPF version 3 compared to OSPF version 2. Router LSA, as you know, in IPv4 and in OSPF version 2 is sent by all routers which advertise the topology and also address of all links connected to the routers. For example, router 1 send a router LSA to advertise the address and topology of the links connected to router 1, which is loopback interface and interface ETH0/0. Router 2 send one router LSA to advertise the address and also the topology of two interfaces connected to router 2, which are interface ETH0/0 and ETH0/1. And the scope of router LSA is area. That means all routers in the area will receive the router LSA advertised by each router. And routers can extract the topology and address information of the entire topology of network in the same area with the help of this router LSA, if we assume that all links are point-to-point links. But what is different in router LSA in OSPF version 3, only topology of links connect to the routers are advertised through router LSA. That means the address information will not be sent anymore through router LSA since it does not fit to the format of router LSA. And instead, the address information will be sent with a new LSA type, which is called LSA type 9 or intra-area prefix, which is the address information of the links or the router LSA, which is sent by each router. That means each router, for each router LSA, send also a intra-area prefix LSA. The topology information of the links connected to the routers are sent through router LSA, and the address information are sent through LSA type 9. To understand practically, let's check, for example, in router 2 with the command show IP OSPF database. And with a router, we say that we are looking for router LSA, which is advertised by router 2 with router ID 222. And if you see, this router send the topology of the links connected to router 2, which are two links, two point-to-point links, a point-to-point link connected to router 3, and a point-to-point link connected to router 1. And also the address information of these two links are sent through router LSA with the tag stop network with prefix 10 to 3 for the link between router 2 and 3 with subnet mask /24 and with prefix address 10.12/24 for the link between router 2 and router 1. This is what router LSA in OSPF version 2 advertised inside the area. But for OSPF version 3, show IPv6, OSPF database router, and again, advertise router 2222, you see two point-to-point links connected router 3 and connected to router 1 are sent through router LSA, but no address information is advertised through router LSA. And because of that, a new LSA type 9 is added in IP version 6 to send the address information. If we check again, the command show IPv6 OSPF database, and to check the type 9 LSA, we use the command prefix and then advertise router 2222, and we see two addresses connected to these two links, 2001 AA23 for the link between router 2 and 3, and 12 for the link between router 1 and router 2 with prefix length /64 are advertised through LSA type 9. The other new LSA type in OSPF version 3 is link LSA or LSA type 8, which is in the scope of link local. That means each router sends in each link the link local address of that link and also the other IPv6 prefixes of the router on that specific link. To understand better, for the router 2 has two interfaces and send therefore two different link LSA, one in the scope of ETH01 and the other in the scope of interface ETH0/0. The link LSA which is sent in interface ETH0/0 will include link local address of the interface and also the other IPv6 prefixes configured in this interface. To better understand, for example, we will check in router 2 again with command show IPv6 OSPF database and then link and then interface, for example, interface ETH0/0 and then advertising router 2222. And you see the information sent through link LSA or link local address of the interface and also other address IPv6 address information configured on that interface, which is 2001 AA12/64. But the scope of this LSA is link local. That means only the router on that link will receive the LSA.